Have you ever really thought about how that lunch you ate just a few hours ago becomes the actual energy you're using to understand my voice right now? It's not magic, it's something way cooler. It's a biological machine. So let's get into it. We're talking about the electron transport chain.
I mean, really think about that scale for a second. Trillions of cells, and every single one needs power, constantly. You'd think the logistics would be a nightmare, but the answer's actually incredibly elegant.
That's really what it boils down to. The final, and by far the most productive step in getting energy from your food happens on this tiny molecular assembly line. This is where the magic really happens.
So first things first, let's get the big picture straight. This isn't just one way your body makes energy. For all practical purposes, this is the main engine.
So what is this thing officially? Well, the electron transport chain, or ETC for short, is a series of special proteins or enzymes. And their location is key. They're all embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. You probably remember hearing that the mitochondrion is the powerhouse of the cell, right? Well, this is exactly why it gets that nickname.
Okay, so let's zoom in a bit, right into that powerhouse, the mitochondrion, just to get our bearings.
Think of it like this. A mitochondrion has four main parts. There's an outer membrane, kind of like a smooth shell, then a wrinkly folded inner membrane. The gap between those two is called the intermembrane space, and deep in the center, you've got the matrix. Now, the part you need to remember is that inner membrane. That is where all the action takes place. Now, the ETC doesn't just create energy out of nothing. It doesn't work in a vacuum, right? It needs fuel, and that fuel gets delivered from other famous processes happening in the cell, like the Krebs cycle. And here they are, our two little fuel delivery trucks, NADH and FADH2. The technical term for them is reducing equivalence, which is really just a fancy way of saying they're carrying a very precious cargo, high-energy electrons. Their entire purpose is to drive over to the ETC and drop off these electrons.
Okay, the fuel has arrived, the delivery has been made, now the main event can begin. And honestly, the best way to picture what happens next is as a tiny, high-stakes relay race.
So here's how it goes down. First, NADH and FADH2 hand off their electrons, like the first runner passing the baton. Then those electrons get passed from one protein complex to the next, down the line. And with every single handoff, a little burst of energy is released. And this is the whole point. The cell grabs that little burst of energy and uses it for one single, super important job, pumping protons from the matrix into that intermembrane space.
So what's the result of all this pumping? Well, you get this massive traffic jam of protons building up in the inner membrane space, while the matrix is left nearly empty. We've created a really steep gradient.
This crazy imbalance of protons has a name. It's called an electrochemical gradient. And you should think of it as pure potential energy. It's exactly like water piling up higher and higher behind a giant hydroelectric dam. That water is just desperate to flow back down, and you know if you open a floodgate, you can harness that incredible power. Well, we've just built that dam right inside ourselves.
So, who are these runners in our little relay race? Let's meet the key players, the actual protein complexes that make all this happen. There are four main players in this. Check out Complex 1, NADH dehydrogenase. The name literally tells you what it does. It dehydrogenates NADH, meaning it strips off a hydrogen with its electron. Complex 2 does basically the same thing for FADH. Then complexes 3 and 4 just continue the relay, passing the electrons along and using the energy to pump even more protons. Now, these big complexes aren't physically stuck together. They need a way to pass the baton, right? That's where these little guys come in. Molecules like coenzyme Q and cytochrome C act like little electron taxis, shuttling the electrons from one complex to the next. Without them, the race would stop dead in its tracks. All right, so we've built our dam. The proton gradient is fully charged up, holding all this amazing potential energy. Now, it's payday. Time to cash it all in and make something the cell can actually use. But there's just one little problem. All those protons are desperate to flow back into the matrix to even things out. The thing is, the inner membrane is like a brick wall. It's totally impermeable to them. They can't get through, so they're stuck.
So, what happens? How does the cell actually use this pressure it's built up? There has to be a gate somewhere, doesn't there?
And there is.
Say hello to the hero of our story, a magnificent enzyme called ATP synthase. If our proton gradient is the water behind the dam, then ATP synthase is the massive turbine built into it. It is the only way back through for those protons.
And here it is, the grand finale. As those protons finally get their chance, they rush through the channel in ATP synthase with incredible force. This flow literally forces a part of the enzyme to spin, just like a water wheel or a turbine. And that spinning, mechanical motion is what provides the raw power to grab a low-energy molecule, ADP, and slam a phosphate onto it, creating high-energy ATP, the universal energy currency for your entire body.
So what's the payoff for all this incredible work? It is staggering. For every one single molecule of glucose that kicks off this whole process, the electron transport chain can crank out around 34 molecules of ATP. That is a massive return on investment. It's why this is the main engine.
But hang on, we've missed one tiny but absolutely critical detail. What happens to the electrons when they get to the very end of the relay race? They can't just pile up. Well, this quote explains it perfectly. At the final step, complex 4, those electrons need a final place to go.
And that final destination is oxygen. The very oxygen you're breathing right now. It swoops in, grabs those used up electrons, combines them with a couple of protons, and forms water. And you have to understand how critical this is. If oxygen isn't there waiting at the end, the whole assembly line jams up with electrons and grinds to a complete halt. No electron flow means no proton pumping, which means no ATP. Game over.
And that brings everything full circle. The reason you breathe, that deep biological instinct to pull air into your lungs, is all to keep this microscopic relay race going. So the next time you take a deep breath, just remember what you're really doing. You're not just filling your lungs. You're providing the final, essential piece to power every single one of your trillions of cellular engines, one breath at a time.